Welcome to the panel discussion segment of today's session. My name is Jan Bays. I'm a Dementia Action Alliance board member and the chair of Optimizing Well-Being Workgroup. I will be the facilitator for this afternoon's discussion. Joining me will be Mike Belleville, Barney Nelson, and LeeAnn Mandarino. Barney and Mike are both members of the Dementia Action Alliance Advisory Board, and they are both living with Lewy Body Dementia. LeeAnn oversees education, advocacy, and outreach programs at the Cleveland Clinic Blue Rio Center for Brain Health. She also leads dementia-friendly Southern Nevada advocacy groups in Las Vegas. Spark's message is a powerful one that calls for further discussion. In this segment of our program, we will hear from the true experts, those living with Lewy body's dementia, and a healthcare educator. They will share experiences, challenges, and advice on living well with Lewy body dementia. Please put any questions that you may have for our panelists in the chat box. Karen Love, our Executive Director for Dementia Action Alliance, will be monitoring your questions. If we have time at the end of the discussion, we'll present these questions to our panelists. If not, we will send out the top 10 questions and answers to all participants after our session today. With that, I think we're ready for our first question. Over 1 million individuals are currently diagnosed with Lewy body's dementia in the US. That's more than all of the residents in Delaware. As we saw in the film, Lewy body's dementia is still widely misunderstood and underdiagnosed, even if one has good access and resources. Getting a correct and timely diagnosis is so important to living well with Lewy body dementia, but it is often very challenging. Mike and Barney, could you describe your experiences getting a diagnosis? Mike, let's start with you.
Sure. Initially, I was diagnosed with younger onset Alzheimer's at the age of 52. Signs and symptoms had started obviously, years before that, but even getting that diagnosis took a couple of years. I was initially told it was depression or work-related stress, or, they were looking at what could potentially be different causes for the signs and symptoms of things that were happening to me. I was told it was Lyme disease and all these types of things until we finally, got a diagnosis of younger onset Alzheimer's. But it wasn't until about 2 or 3 years later, talking to our neurologist, and my wife Cheryl started bringing up other things that were happening to me, the sleep issues, the hallucinations, all these other things that were already happening. We just didn't even realize that they were part of what was wrong with me. That the doctor then changed the diagnosis to Lewy body dementia with Parkinsonism. So it is very challenging and a very misunderstood form of dementia. And I honestly believe that the numbers are way higher than what's being told. Because it's so misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed.
Barney, what is your experience?
Well, I think I agree with Mike in that there is a lot of misdiagnosis going on with Lewy body, because Lewy body has some very similar things to Parkinsonism and some very similar things to Alzheimer's, and it's kind of sort of in the middle is one way to say it. So it's very easy to misdiagnose it. Now, in my particular case, it was interesting because I started noticing some cognitive decline of sorts, not major, but of sorts, particularly when it came to multitasking. I had already had REM sleep disorder, where you act out your dreams in your sleep, and they talked about this in the movie. You can thrash around, you can talk in your sleep and talk just like I'm talking right now. You can come flying out of your bed. And I'd had it for well over 10 years, which increasingly is being seen as a potential tell for future dementia if you have long-term REM sleep disorder. But then the cognitive thing started to kick in somewhat. And I thought also that my normal benign tremor that I sort of had with my hand, sort of a normal kind of tremor, was actually getting a little worse. And then the thing that was the real tell, though, was in fact started having some hallucinations that are called hypnopompic hallucinations, because they would come on as you wake up in the middle of the night. And over a period of time, we kind of figured out some compensating strategies to help with that. But that was a real tell. So I started really doing some research on my own. There's a lot of information out there at the lbdaa.org website, for example. And by the time I got with my final, after a neuropsych test with a really good neuropsych and a neurologist, ended up with my final neurologist who worked at an extremely good aging and Alzheimer's center here in Portland, Oregon. I kind of already knew what I had, at least I had a really good feel for it. And because I kept a log of my experiences and things like that, and turned it over to my doctor ahead of time, she kind of had a good feel for what I had too. So, that really, as it turns out, my symptoms kind of fell very much in line with Lewy body dementia, which didn't sound like that was the case with Mike, and Mike, you might have to correct me on that. But it made my diagnosis a little bit easier. And in about an 8-month period of time, kind of got to that diagnosis. Other people can take so much longer because it is so difficult. And to be fair to our medical friends, it is so difficult to do this, as Michael was saying, I believe, the brain is such a complex organ. It makes it really difficult to get to a diagnosis, even though that's what everybody wants.
LeeAnn, from a healthcare educator's perspective, and with your history of working with medical professionals, both in hearing their discussions and understanding their challenges, what comments do you have about this topic?
Well, I think if you're looking to get an accurate diagnosis for any health issue, it really starts with the patient, and especially with a disease as multifaceted and with so many types of syndromes as Lewy body dementia, you really have to be a note taker. You have to keep a notebook of every symptom that you have, even if you don't think it's a big deal. For instance, depression. A lot of men especially will not talk about their depression. But as you see, depression is a really key syndrome of Lewy body dementia. And if they had noted this and told their physician about this, then it would be one more syndrome in their arsenal to diagnose. Another one, for instance, is your sleep disturbances. A lot of people may not bring up that they have a sleep problem at night with their physician. So it's important to note every single detail of your health status. And it's also really important to bring your partner, the one that's closest to you, into to help you relay what symptoms you may be having, because they may know things and notice things that you may not, especially if you're having cognitive problems. They would pick up on a cognitive problem or a REM sleep disorder. If you're acting out at night, you may not know it because you're sleeping, but your partner will definitely recognize it. And just note this and keep this in a notebook. For the Dementia Friendly group that we hold in Las Vegas, we created a book, and we created a space, particularly, I don't know if you could see this because of my background, but we created a space specifically for people to keep notes about what they're experiencing, what their doctor's appointments are, what their medications are that they're using, any key symptoms that you may be having. Very important to share with your doctor, because your doctor doesn't know what your doctor doesn't know. Know your medical history. If you've had sleep problems 10 years ago, like Barney did, note that. If you've had depression in the past or anxiety, note that. let your doctor know what your medical history is. Be open to a diagnosis. My mother's a former nurse, and she goes into the physician and she's telling them what she has. And then she's not letting them tell her if she has something. So you have to be open-minded to a diagnosis. And I think it's also very important to educate yourself. There are education programs out there. What are the education programs in your community? I know at the Cleveland Clinic, we have a plethora of education programs that are virtual online. And for any type of syndrome you may have, for any disease, there's plenty of podcasts and virtual educational programs that are out there that could alert you to something that you may have. So it's very important to stay on top of your own health so you could help your physicians diagnose you and manage your treatments.
It's so good.
The one thing I'd like to add, Jan, was it was interesting what Barney talked about with the multitasking, because it reminded me that at work and home, we're showing up in two different ways. So at work, I was losing my multitasking skills. I was losing the ability to manage projects and things that I was doing. But at home, it showed up differently in my personality, because my personality was changing. I was quicker to anger. I was losing interest in things that always, my hobbies, things that I always wanted to do. And, my wife had actually told me that, I was not the same person that she married, at that time was 32 years. So it showed up differently, at work versus at home. So I think that's something to be aware of as well.
I love all of this advice. I love LeeAnn's advice about being a well-educated consumer or patient. That is so significantly important in getting the diagnosis that you need. But I also love her advice about not self-diagnosing, because I've noticed that one of the downsides to all of the great information that we have available to us is that maybe those of us who are not physicians jump ahead to conclusions and then don't think about adding in all of the symptoms that we think don't relate to this. It's something else, and it's so important to bring all of that to the doctor's visit and let your neurologist know all of those different symptoms that you're experiencing, so that can help them get the right diagnosis.
I'd like to point out something that Mike said about his moods changing. That's really important information. And sometimes the person themselves may not realize what's happening, but your spouse certainly is going to realize it. So that's why it's so important to have your spouse as a partner in your healthcare.
Yeah, I really also want to really highlight something that LeeAnn said about, whenever possible, try and take as much control as you can over your own personal diagnostic journey. That level of control that you can exert will bring a certain amount of peace to the process that you're going through. And there is information out there. There are ways that you can talk to your doctors and, ask for things in a fairly assertive way. And it's perfectly okay to do that. But that's a really important thing I thought that LeeAnn said. I run across people very regularly that feel like they went to various doctors and just couldn't seem to get answers and just didn't know what to do, didn't know how to handle it. Total lack of control. And that is always going to be a high anxiety type of situation, as it was for Robin Williams and his family.
Right. And you're not going to get the answers you want until you push for them. You just have to, sometimes you have to draw out the information any way you can, including with your physician or your practitioner. And so, and if you suspect that, you have a neurological issue, a dementia cognitive problem, insist that you be referred to a specialist, because that specialist will certainly be able to provide a better diagnosis. than maybe a general practitioner. General practitioners, they see a lot of different types of problems. And so they may not recognize every single issue that you may be having. So insist that you see a specialist, a neurologist, or you know, whatever issue you're having. It's very important to get your outcomes will be so much better.
So when you are educated and you begin to understand a little bit about these different diseases, and maybe your diagnosis doesn't quite make sense to you, just a quick another round. What do one of you or all of you have some advice for that situation?
Well, I think that, as LeeAnn's been saying, and you know, I mentioned keeping a log, you know, to the extent that you have some good data that shows what happened over what period of time, and you know, you can present that. I think it can really help doctors. Well, I know in my case, like I think I said, my doctor said it helped her really with the diagnosis even before I'd even seen her, because I sent her in advance this data, this information, my incident type of log, you know, type of thing. That's one of the best things I think you can do. And I think LeeAnn was talking about that. You know, the problem is if you just go in to see a doctor and you try and remember all the things that, you know, while you're there and all that, you may miss some things. I'm a huge believer in having somebody with you. In my case, it was my wife, who was with me on every single particular visit to every single doctor, who could validate what I was saying, and then add some things that I just forgot about or whatever. So there are some of those types of things that you can do that can really help support the doctor with going through, you know, a diagnostic process, you know, for you.
Mike, what about you? I know that you went through a series of diagnoses getting to your diagnosis with Lewy Body Dementia. Do you have anything different to add?
I think the thing I would like to highlight, and I hope this doesn't come out wrong, but it's still so misunderstood, even within the medical community itself. And I'll just give a quick example. I belong to an online support group of people who have Lewy Body Dementia. And not long ago, we had this sweet lady who everybody adores, who was diagnosed with Lewy Body 2 years ago. And her doctor, I don't know if it was a general practitioner or a neurologist, because of preconceived notions about the disease itself, you know, told her, as well as I was initially told, I'd be in a nursing home within 3 to 5 years. Next month will make 8 years since my diagnosis. But he actually told her after 2 years that because she wasn't in a nursing home yet, that she doesn't have Lewy body. So, I mean, imagine her world right now being completely turned upside down. And so, and I only bring that up again, just to show how difficult it is, even within the medical community, to, you know, what this diagnosis or what this disease or how hard it is to get the diagnosis. And even then, been, you know, a number of people that I know who were initially told they had Lewy body, only to be told later, no, that can't be it because of this, or that can't be it because of that. So it's really, really important to find a place like the Cleveland Clinic. Fortunately, I live in New England. I live in where I go to Mass General, Harvard, what Brigham and Women's, you know, what the Lewy Body Dementia Association called the Regional Centers of Excellence. Get somewhere that knows Lewy body. Get with a neurologist who specializes in not just dementia, but especially if it's Lewy body, to get the right answers. It's critical.
I think that if you're having some sort of life-changing health problems, it's really important to get a second opinion. We do it for cancer. We do it for heart disease. You need to do this for neurological issues as well.
I couldn't agree more. And that's exactly what we did. And actually the neurologist who gave us the initial diagnosis encouraged us to go to Mass General to get a second opinion. So major kudos to him.
Well, thank you, Mike. I think your last comments really are a great segue to our next question. The public has heard a lot about the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. We've touched on a lot of the symptoms of Lewy body's disease today through the video, but I wondered if Mike and Barney, you could describe the symptoms of Lewy bodies that you experience.
Absolutely. I think the story that I share with folks, and just real quickly, there was a time where, you know, my wife come home because she still works a full-time job. She came in the door one day and told me, she said, you know, I don't know what to expect when I open the door, because she never knows what type of mood I'm going to be in. And, you know, am I depressed? Is my anxiety high? You know, am I delusional? Whatever it is. And it made me come to think, or use the analogy that I told her. I said, you know what? I feel like I'm all the characters of Winnie the Pooh, because there's times where I feel like I'm Eeyore, where I'm old body, you know, and there's times where I feel like I'm Tigger or I'm Piglet, where I'm just anxiety all over the place. But for me, that's the best way I can describe it, because that's what it feels like every single day. And it can change within the day. I could go from being what I hope to be the lovable, huggable Winnie the Pooh to being Piglet or Tigger or Eeyore in a matter of minutes. You know, I call it going from 0 to 60. You know, I can change just like that. And just the way it was explained in the video, how Robin had no control over it. I have no control over it. I don't do this, or, you know, on purpose. And it's hard, especially because at times I am very aware of it, you know, but I have no control over my mood or my actions or my words or things like that. And so it's hard, you know, watching my wife be on the receiving end of all that.
Barney?
Yeah, I think along with Mike, I have my Eeyore moments from time to time, and I also have my Lewy moments.
Right.
One of the things that happens with Lewy body is you can, on an anger meter, you can go from 2 to 3 to 8 or 9 in like a rocket ship taking right off. And if we didn't have doctors that could explain to us, that is very typical for Lewy body, and here's some compensating types of strategies that they gave to us that have helped. It would be yet another one of those situations where you wonder what the heck is going on, and I don't like myself when I'm like this. In fact, I hate myself when I'm like this. Why is it going on? I'm ashamed, everything else. All those emotions that you saw in that film is what you end up feeling. And so once you know what's really going on, and for me, you know, my cognitive impairment is what's called mild cognitive impairment. That's what I was diagnosed with about 2 years ago. Whereas my Lewy body symptoms lots of times are more pronounced in some of the other areas, like hallucinations and tremors and the REM sleep disorder that's been around for some time. That's just the way it presents. But as I think Mike was alluding to, all of these things kind of present themselves at weird times, you know, up and down and all over the place when it comes to Lewy body. Lewy body is kind of known for that. Unlike other types of dementias that might have a little bit more predictable type of progression in some form or fashion, whether it's vascular dementia or Alzheimer's, Lewy body is different symptoms, a lot of different symptoms potentially. And when they show up and the degree that the level that they show up can be very, very different and can happen within short periods of time on the same day or a long period of time. I've had long periods of time, not long plural, but periods plural, but I did have a long period of time where I thought I was doing pretty darn good in general. I wasn't really feeling a lot of these symptoms, to the point where I was wondering, is there really anything wrong with me? Only to find out that that's very typical sometimes. A lot of people with Lewy body is you will just be so up and down, and then for a while they'll just kind of be idling over here a little bit, and then suddenly bam, 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 off it goes.
Yeah, and we actually, my wife calls my alternate personality Lewy.
Yeah.
So when Lewy shows up, it's
Yeah.
usually not, you know, most of the time it's not a good thing. So,
And that's one of those compensating strategies that we got from our doctor was, if you can recognize that it's Lewy that's showing up when you're going to that 8 or 9 on the anger meter, and whoever you're with is aware of that and can understand that, then you can say, I think I'm going Lewy, or whoever you're talking to can say, are you going Lewy? And you take this Lewy idea and it's almost like you put it over on the side, almost like this third person type of entity. And that allows you then to maybe realize that you have 10 minutes, take a 10-minute break or something like that. And allows you to get kind of some control back. And that we've actually found that to work pretty well. It's like Mike was saying, you kind of let Lewy out, but put Lewy over here somewhere if you can, almost like this third party thing. And for us, at least, we found that to be a pretty good compensating strategy.
Last week when we were talking, I was fascinated with the discussion that we had on hallucinations. And Mike, I wish would you mind revisiting that conversation about the hallucinations that you experience?
Sure. I'll be honest with you, I don't recall the entire conversation, but I can speak to what my challenges are. And I do have visual hallucinations, but not as much as the majority of hallucinations I actually have are auditory and smell. I hear conversations frequently of, that I know aren't real because I'm alone in the house and there's no radio playing, there's no TV on, there's no nothing, but I hear conversations. But the ones that bother me the most are smell. And I smell fire a lot, or even cigarette smoke. And there's no one in the house that's smoking. But the fire is the one that bothers me the most because that obviously gets me out of my chair, makes me walk around, even though there's no smoke detectors going off or anything else. But the thing that I found interesting was I learned along the way that, hallucinations actually affect all of your senses. And I remember being at a meeting one time and was sitting at this table. There was nobody. This was actually pre-COVID, but there was nobody sitting within 3 feet or 4 feet on either side of me, and the table was really wide. And the only person sitting across from me was this lovely lady who was about 5'2", but I felt feeling somebody tapping me in the foot, like somebody was playing footsies with me. And to the point where I actually looked under the table, and of course there was nothing going on. But it made me realize, and I said something to somebody and they said, well, yeah, that was a hallucination. And I was like, boom. I was like, really? It never occurred to me. And, but then, like you think back and I'm always feeling somebody touching me, like tapping me on the shoulder or this or that. So it really affects all of your senses. It's not just visual that most people stop to think about when you think of hallucinations. Fortunately, they're not disturbing, except for the fire. The visual ones, with the exception of a couple, have not been very disturbing. So,
what kind of visual hallucinations do you have?
Again, I live. We don't have any pets, but I see dogs and cats in my house. There was one disturbing one was we were driving down the highway and I saw what I thought I saw was a car going in the wrong direction on the opposite side of the highway, expected to see this horrible crash and nothing happened. Another one, I was walking on a track and this lady stepped in front of me and started walking the track. And I, like less than a quarter of a lap, I turned and she was gone, completely gone. So my biggest challenge has always been, I can tell when I'm having a hallucination in the house. Like I said, we don't have pets. The challenging part is not knowing when I'm having hallucination outside of my normal environment. And so there's times where if I see something that looks strange or odd or something that just doesn't belong there, I'll ask Cheryl, my wife, and she'll, for confirmation as to whether or not she's seen it. And some of the times she's, yeah, I see that, and other times, she hasn't. So then at least I know it's a hallucination. But it's more than even just that. It's visual. It's the way our brains are taking information from the outside and reading it. I have times even where I'm reading, like a piece of paper or something, and what I think I'm reading, I'm not reading. The words don't make sense. I'm sorry, the best way, again, I'll explain that is we were spending a weekend at some friend's house and we had our own bathroom. So I'd wash my hands, after going to the bathroom all the time. And I used a soap dispenser and I read the bottle and it said, what I thought said holy water. So the entire weekend, using, the same soap dispenser, it wasn't until we finally left that I looked at it again and it said holly in winter. So I went to my my wife's girlfriend. I said, that's the best darn smelling holy water I ever had smelled. But it's the way our brains are receiving this information. There's so many times, even just driving down the highway, I see these big billboards and I'll read something and I'll just start laughing. And Cheryl will say, oh, what did that one say? So we, I kind of turn it into a game. But so I don't know if that's a hallucination or not, or if it's just the way my brain is processing the information.
Mike, I think you have some ESP going on here, because you always seem to be saying something that just leads us right into the next question. That is just beautiful. Actually, our next question is kind of a continuation of this same discussion, but I want to ask, what are some of the unexpected challenges that you have faced? Barney, why don't you start? Give Mike a little break here because he just told us one.
Well, one of the things with Lewy body is that the doctors talk to you about and kind of warn you about is the balance type of issue and falling. And we got some very good advice from some family members that have been through Lewy body with somebody. And they said, get to a single story home as soon as you possibly can, because this falling thing is potentially going to happen. And so the idea of stairs and things like that becomes somewhat dangerous. So we sold our house and here we are now in this single story home. That was unexpected, to have to do that, but it made some sense. And it felt like a good proactive thing to do. So that was probably the most unexpected thing that came out of this whole thing for me, was having to make some of those balance and tremor type of issues. At this point, I have a really difficult time handling a keyboard. I just too much of the tremors and stuff like that. So thank God there's these microphones, verbal, audio things you can do that'll spell out, what you say in Word or in Outlook. And that really does help me out a lot, makes things a lot better.
Mike, what about you? Are there any other unexpected challenges that you would like to tell us about?
Yeah, I would actually. And I think it's the hardest one for me. And that is what's very, very difficult is if my brain gets overstimulated. And we have 6 grandchildren, 5 living with us, ranging in age from 1 to 11. And when they want to come over, of course, they're all, very close. And, my daughters and son-in-laws and our 24-year-old son, and just having a normal family outing, especially around, just pick a holiday, is very, very challenging. And to the point where, my biggest challenge is I want them to still be kids. I want them to enjoy themselves. I don't want their memory of me to be, oh, we went to Pappy's house and we had to be extra quiet because the noise bothered him. I don't want that to be their memory of me. I want them to continue to have hopefully good memories. So the challenge, for me is to know, to try to still be part of the family and the conversation, but at the same time, it's very hard for me to be included in that without my brain just going into overdrive. And, you know, I've got to give major kudos to the, you know, the film guys who were talking about Robin Williams when, without even knowing what was wrong with him, they were giving him that room he needed to take the break in between things. That is so key and so important. I mean, and incredible that they were doing that for him. And I think for people with Lewy body, I mean, or even any form of dementia, but, you know, especially I think Lewy body, we need that space. We need that time to take a break and to get away, even if it's 10 minutes, a half an hour, whatever it's going to take. So, you know, when we were initially told about the diagnosis and this and that, you go through the whole process, but the last thing I was thinking of was how this was going to affect us. You know, our family as a whole, just having a normal family cookout. And it's tough. It's really challenging.
Well, as we kind of phase into our next question, are there any other things that you would like people to know about Lewy body disease? Maybe some things that are surprises to folks that are not obvious, things they might not know.
Well, I think, you know, with Lewy body, there's likely to be, as I understand it, there's likely to be some cognitive issues, but it may not very well be at the level of maybe some other types of dementias. I mentioned that some of my other Lewy body symptoms are a little more pronounced and aren't necessarily cognitive, sort of a mild cognitive impairment. So, you know, one of the things that I'm a big believer in is acceptance of the situation. And when people see that in you, that you've accepted your situation, then lots of times they can then you can see almost this relief come across them. And this is really important with kids. Mike mentioned families, you know, and how important it is, you know, to be around your family. And what I try to do with my kids is, in that particular case, is just accept my situation as I've accepted my situation also. And then we can go on. Then we can go on and do things, maybe things we never thought of doing before, but they're going to be things we're going to do as a family. They're not going to be walking on eggshells, perhaps, quite as much as they have before. And that's something that I'm a really big believer in. I'm not sure it exactly answers your question, but I just wanted this kind of came out of my mouth and I said it.
Mike, how about you?
I don't know if it's just specifically with Lewy body, but I think in all forms of dementia, it's more than memory loss. It's not just we're forgetting things, and that seems to be the number one thing that is discussed or shown on, you know, movies and news program and all these things, and it really does affect us in so many other different ways, in ways that people may not understand. And I think it's hard for them to see us and know that we're having this great normal conversation with you right now and think that there's nothing wrong with us. Trust me when I tell you, we're not faking this, okay? But, you know, just ask our loved ones, our spouses, you know, sit with them for an hour and they'll tell you all the crazy things that they have to deal with. But it's just way more than memory loss. And the other thing is that hopefully folks will realize that even with a diagnosis like this, and as hard as it was for Robin, because he didn't get the diagnosis, I truly believe what his wife said, had he gotten one, I think it would have been a lot different for him.
Oh yeah.
That you can still live a meaningful, purposeful life. You can still contribute in meaningful ways within your community or whatever way that's meaningful to you. You still have a life to live. And no one knows how long the progression of this disease is going to take from person to person, you know, from point A to point B, you know, so, you know, what are you going to do with your life during that time? And, I like one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite movies, Shawshank Redemption, is, get busy living or get busy dying. And I've chosen to get busy living. And I know Barney has, as well as a number of us. And, to Robin Williams, I mean, he's still impacting lives in a meaningful way. And he was just an incredible individual who did a lot of amazing things.
Yeah.
You did it for us again. Our time is rapidly running out, and I don't want us to miss this last questions because I think it's so important. What advice do you have about living well with Lewy body's dementia? Barney, why don't you start?
Well, I should have saved my accepting comment to this question, I guess. But I am such a believer in that. They are the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. I don't really have use for denial or anger. Anger does come up sometimes. Of course, it's normal, and it can be accelerated by dementia, as it turns out. But if you can get to acceptance, that's when you open the door to live a life in a different way than maybe you lived it before, but do some things in a new way that are really rewarding for you. I would have never thought I was going to, 2.5 years ago, before I was diagnosed, I'd be a dementia advocate. I didn't even know what that was. I mean, but here I am right now talking to you nice people. So, and I started playing tennis again. I hadn't played for 40 years, played in college and stopped playing, and I started playing tennis again, because you think about a ball coming at you at hopefully 60 miles an hour because you're a good tennis player, and you have to have this spatial awareness and strategy thinking, movement, all these types of things. It's really good for the brain, and so I've been trying to invest in those types of activities, to help go through this, and I'm finding that humor is a terrific elixir, by the way. Humor is, if you can, I don't make fun of other people. I make fun of myself, or I make fun of the situation. I also like to golf, and golf is a fertile ground for jokes and for making fun of things. When you're hitting a ball right through somebody's kitchen window, that's, if you're not laughing, then you're running and calling the lawyer, I guess. But, but humor is a great elixir. Not only if you make other people laugh, does it make you feel better, but if other people laugh, then they also feel more comfortable with you. And you've broken down some of that wall between you and that person, and now you're connecting even more, which is so important.
Thank you. Mike, do you have a real quick one?
Apologize, I forgot what the question was.
Oh, what advice do you have about living well with Lewy body's dementia?
Oh, I'll just real quick. I think the #1 prescription doctors should be giving a person with a dementia diagnosis in general is social engagement. Medication is important, of course, and we do take our medication, but there's a lot to be said about keeping someone socially engaged in a way that's meaningful to them. I think that's the best medicine of all.
Thank you.
We promote 6 pillars to brain health here at the Cleveland Clinic. And it's pretty universal, but exercise, getting that exercise, Barney, it really helps get that circulation going, gets the blood rushing through the brain, cleansing it. Sleep, super important. Your brain does so much while it's sleeping and cleaning out the toxins. Social engagement, keeping your brain active by talking with other people and getting that sense of purpose. Eating well, very important to eat well and get those nutrients in your body. Stress, dealing with stress, trying to just manage your stress much better. And then just working your brain, learning new things. And could I just say one more thing before we take questions, is that one of the things we do at Dementia Friendly Nevada is really try to work on the stigma of people who have to live with dementia, because that gets them more involved and it gets them to the doctor. A lot of people live with the stigma, and that's not helpful for anybody, especially for researchers trying to resolve these issues with the brain, because people aren't getting the diagnosis and they're not joining clinical trials. So it's really important to break the stigma. And I just want to thank Barney and Mike for speaking out and letting people know how well you're living with this and the issues that you are having. It's so important. Thank you.
I want to thank all of our panelists for the wonderful, wonderful discussion that we've had this afternoon. I think it's a wonderful conclusion and follow-up to the moving film that we saw about Robin Williams. Our time is up, and so I want to say thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.